Hello there. This is All 24 News World News program coming to you live from Algiers with me, Karim Zachary. These are your headlines. Ships filled with grain are set to leave Ukraine's Black Sea ports after the UN and Turkey brokered an export deal. Ukrainian officials accuse Russian forces of striking the Black Sea port of Odessa after an agreement to restart shipments of blockaded grain. Motorists queue at petrol stations in Sri Lanka as desperately needed fuel arrives in the country. Thailand's Prime Minister and 10 of his ministers survived a no-confidence vote. And also coming up, Donald Trump's former advisor Steve Bannon is found guilty of contempt of Congress. Hello again, you are following today's top stories. First in our news, ships filled with grain could finally be leaving after Moscow and Kiev signed a deal allowing shipments from ports on the Black Sea. 20 million tons of grain from last year's harvest are set to be ready to go, but that could mean the world's impending food crisis could be averted. The details with Nabil Khazini.
An unprecedented ceremony between two warring sides. Kiev and Moscow signed two identical but separate texts at the request of Ukraine, which refused to initial any document with Russia. The agreement should allow safe corridors for the exit by the Black Sea of Ukrainian cereals blocked by the war, and an easing of the obstacles to the export of Russian cereals and fertilizers.
This is an agreement for the world. It will bring relief for developing countries on the edge of bankruptcy and the most vulnerable people on the edge of famine. And it will help stabilize global food prices, which were already at record levels even before the war, a true nightmare for developing countries.
This mediation, backed by Turkey and the United Nations, is the first between Moscow and Kiev since the start of the war, and represents a breakthrough to the more than 25 million tons of grain which are waiting to be shipped abroad from Ukrainian ports.
Önümüzdeki günlerde başlayacak.
We have constantly dialogued with our Russian and Ukrainian counterparts. We have carried out in-depth exchanges in order to meet the expectations and concerns of both countries.
Under the terms of the deal, Russia will not target ports while shipments are in transit. Ukrainian vessels will guide cargo ships through waters that have been mined. Turkey, supported by the United Nations, will inspect ships to relieve Russian fears of weapons smuggling. And Russian exports of grain and fertilizer via the Black Sea will be facilitated. However, analysts are skeptical that the agreement will not change things overnight.
We have to also, part of the agreement is to ensure that the vessels coming in are just moving what's legitimate goods, that they're moving not military goods or other kinds of things. So they have to be, the cargoes will have to be examined. This will all add, complexity and most importantly, add time to it.
During the past 6 months, food prices have soared increasingly in many parts of the world, leaving millions of people facing a huge threat of malnutrition.
All 24 News understands that the deal calls for a joint control and coordination center that will be established in Istanbul. It will schedule the shipments. Each of the four parties will pick a lead coordinator, but the UN will be in overall control. All ships transporting grain in and out of Ukraine will be inspected. The inspections will take place at a port in Turkey. The deal also ensures safe passage for the shipments of grain. The vessels are not to face any aggression nor attack, and military ships won't be involved. The agreements will run for 4 months and will be automatically renewed if none of the signatories object. Ukrainian officials accused Russian forces of striking the Black Sea port of Odessa with missiles on Saturday, a day after Moscow and Kiev agreed to restart shipments of blockaded grain in a deal brokered by the United Nations and Turkey. Lithuania has lifted a ban on rail transport of sanctioned goods into the Russian territory of Kaliningrad. Russia's state news agency says Lithuania began blocking building materials and alcohol bound for Kaliningrad in June, citing EU sanctions. But last week, the bloc said that the goods should be allowed through because the sanctions only affect road transit. The restrictions triggered an outcry and threats of retaliation from Moscow. And for developments on the ground, more than 10 missiles hit Ukraine's central city, which left 3 people dead and many more injured. Zelensky said on Friday that no peace can be brought to his country without reclaiming eastern territories that have been occupied by Russia. Islam said.
Local officials in Ukraine's central Kirovohrad region said 3 people were killed and 9 more injured as 13 Russian missiles hit a military airfield and a railway infrastructure, which led to a power cut in the area. As the fighting continues on the battlefield, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Friday, a ceasefire with Russia without regaining lost territories will merely extend the conflict. According to Zelensky, Russia's military conduct would be encouraged if Ukraine gives up territories that Russia currently holds.
Freezing the conflict with the Russian Federation means a pause that gives the Russian Federation a break for rest. Society believes that all the territories must be liberated first, and then we can negotiate about what to do and how we could live in the centuries ahead. A more pressing need is air defense systems that could prevent Russia from raining long-range missiles on otherwise peaceful cities hundreds of miles from the front lines.
On the other hand, the United States pledged to provide $270 million for the military assistance for Ukraine, including Phoenix Ghost kamikaze drones, and is currently deciding whether to send fighter jets. Kiev hopes that its growing supply of Western arms, such as U.S. high-mobility artillery rocket system, will give it the chance to recapture the eastern region.
The German government will take a roughly 30% stake in energy supplier Uniper as part of a rescue package following surge in prices for natural gas and reduced Russian deliveries. Uniper, which has been Germany's biggest importer of Russian gas, asked for a bailout 2 weeks ago. German officials quickly pledged that they would help, but thrashing out the details took time. And in the same context, Power and Energy Minister Contempt said that one heavy fuel oil cargo and another petrol cargo arrived on Thursday, and unloading would start after the routine quality test of samples. He added that heavy fuel oil will be utilized for power generations and industries. Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and 10 of his ministers have survived a no-confidence vote. Opposition parties filed a motion in June alleging ethics violation. The vote was seen as the last big test prior to a year premiership ahead of an election next year.
Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha thwarted an opposition attempt to topple his government on Saturday after surviving a non-confidence motion in parliament. Prayut won the vote in the House Representative with 256 votes in favor and 206 against, in addition to 9 abstentions from members of parliament.
The number of those opposing the no-confidence motion is 256, 9 abstained and no absentee votes. The votes against him is less than the required majority, which means the consensus is that he has gained confidence.
The vote came after 4 days of live-stream debate this week and marked the opposition's latest attempt to topple Prayut government. 10 cabinet ministers who were attacked by the opposition in the non-confidence motion also survived the vote.
I would like to thank those who joined the parliament session today. Everyone, this is democracy taking place in a parliamentary system. Thank you so much.
The 68-year-old former army chief, in power since a coup he led in 2014, secured his position as a premier until his term ends in March. It was the 4th time Prayut's performance had been put to a vote since he was chosen by the House to remain prime minister in 2019, following an election the opposition said was held under the rules designed to keep him in power. Prayut has rejected that assertion. Despite recent opinion polls showing that his popularity is on the wane, Prayut was expected to remain prime minister according to political analysts, some of whom saw the censure motion as an opposition move to court public support before the upcoming elections. Prayut has given no indication of when an election will be called.
Former top political advisor to Donald Trump has been convicted of contempt. Steve Barron refused to comply with a congressional order to testify about the attack on Capitol Hill in January. Miriam Zian has the story.
Steve Bannon, a key associate of former President Donald Trump, was convicted on Friday of contempt of Congress for defying subpoena from the committee investigating last year's attack on the U.S. Capitol. A jury found him guilty of 2 demeanor counts for refusing to provide testimony to the House of Representatives Select Committee. Each contempt of Congress count is punishable by 30 days to 1 year behind bars, as well as a fine of $100,000 to $100,000. After less than 3 hours of deliberations, the verdict marked the first successful prosecution for contempt of Congress since 1974. The trial featured 2 days of testimony. Prosecutors questioned only 2 witnesses, but the defense called none. The influential figure on the American right accused the January 6th Commission of lacking in nerve.
We have one disappointment, and that is the gutless members of that show trial committee. The J6 committee didn't have the guts to come down here and testify in open court. Thank you very much.
Bannon's defense argued that he believed the subpoena's deadline were flexible. But this month, he announced to testify in a public hearing before the committee, an offer that prosecutors said did not change the fact that he had already broken the law.
See this case reversed on appeal. You will see all of these resources, 3 federal prosecutors, 4 FBI agents for misdemeanor, being wasted.
Bannon was a key advisor to the Republican Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, and even after being removed from the White House in August 2017, Bannon had remained close to Donald Trump and had traded with him the day before the attack. The investigation on the Capitol attack is still ongoing, and White House declines to comment on former Trump advisor, and the White House declines to comment on former Trump advisor's case, but says all people should cooperate with January 6th inquiry.
Former President Donald Trump and his former Vice President Mike Pence are campaigning for rival candidates in Arizona's election for governor. The race is seen as a broader referendum on the future of the Republican Party. The former U.S. president is backing Kari Lake, a television journalist and champion of his America Fast policies, while Mike Pence is backing the lawyer Karen Taylor Robson for Arizona governor. Taylor Robson has openly described the 2020 presidential election as unfair, but stopped short of agreeing with Trump's claims of electoral fraud. Temperatures are increasing in northern Mexico states as a heat wave intensified the seasonal drought in Ciudad Juarez. People are settling or battling power outages and water shortages. The local governor is to set up hydration points to offer relief to those suffering from the heat. Over the border in California, the heat is fueling a fast-moving oak fire. It spread across more than 600 hectares into the Sierra National Forest. Officials in Mariposa County issued several evacuation orders. It's the county's third wildfire in 2 weeks. The east coast of the United States is also suffering due to heat. Warnings are in effect from South Carolina up to parts of New England. The U.S. heat wave follows similar conditions in Europe. Last week, scientists say that extreme weather will become more frequent due to climate change. Flash floods in Iran's southern Fars province have killed more than 20 people. According to local reports, it comes after heavy rain swelled the Rod Bal River by the city of Istaban. That's several hundred kilometers southeast of the capital, Tehran. Rescue teams have been able to bring at least 55 people to safety, but others are still missing. Iran's National Meteorology Department warned residents about the rainfall as the region has been hit by decades-long drought. But many experts are linking to climate change. People in a slum On Friday afternoon, confrontations broke out in isolated areas of the West Bank following the occupation forces' repression of Palestinian events. Dozens of casualties occurred among Palestinians as soldiers stood by settlers and fired metal bullets and gas bombs in Nablus. Confrontation broke out with occupying forces in the vicinity of Jebel Sabih in Beta town, south of the city, after Friday prayer were performed. The Zionists prevented citizens from reaching the settlement outpost in citizens' lands. Algerian Foreign Affairs Minister Amtal Mamra continues a working visit to Iraq as an envoy to the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. In Baghdad, the head of the Algerian diplomacy spoke with his Iraqi counterpart, Fouad Mohammed Hussein, and reviewed bilateral relations and ways and means to strengthen them. In this context, the heads of state diplomacy recommended the deep fraternal and historical ties between the two countries and agreed on the calendar of future bilateral entitlements, in particular the 14th session of the Algerian-Iraqi Joint Commission, as well as the exchange of support for the two countries' candidacies in international and regional bodies.
The important meeting between Algeria and Iraq is an opportunity to contribute to developing this perception of the position of the Arab world by expressing its position in the near future, especially in light of the important agenda that will be presented to the leaders of the Arab countries at Algiers Summit, which will be held on November 1st and November 2nd in Algeria.
We have addressed threats to food security and health security. The dimensions of this war offer its impact on the global economy and how to deal with this crisis in our countries. There was a proposal in the Arab League and the proposal turned into action. The contract group of foreign ministers of Arab countries was formed to deal with this global international crisis.
Algeria strongly condemned terrorism everywhere and in all circumstances and expressed deep concern at the attack in Bamako. According to an Algerian foreign statement, this development reaffirms the need to further mobilize the entire international community to prevent and eliminate terrorism. The same statement added that Algeria stressed the strategic importance of the effective and tireless implementation of the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement in Mali, emanating from Algeria's initiative. Clashes erupted on Friday in Tunisia after a new demonstration in the capital, resulting in several arrests. The demonstrators were met by a heavy police presence, including water cannons and riot gear. This protest against President Kais Said's policy comes a few days before the referendum on the new constitution that grants the president broad powers. Clashes between competing militias in Libya's capital killed at least 13 people on Friday evening. A spokesman for Tripoli's emergency services said despite calls for calm after violence first broke out the previous night, it was the latest escalation to threaten the relative peace and after nearly a decade of civil war in Libya, where two rival sets of authorities are locked in a political stalemate. The divisions have sparked several incidents of violence in Tripoli in recent months, but most have been over in a matter of hours. The Moroccan Ministry of Royal Household announced Friday the postponement of all activities, festivities and ceremonies planned on the occasion of Throne Day. Social media showed many observers questioning the real reason behind his decision. Let's follow.
The Moroccan Minister of the Royal Household Protocol and Chancellery announced this Friday in a statement that taking into consideration the continuation of preventive measures imposed by the evolution of the health situation related to the COVID-19 pandemic, it has been decided to postpone all activities, festivities and ceremonies planned on the occasion of Throne Day, celebrated on July 30th. However, observers are questioning the validity of the reasons given by the statement of royal inertia, since they merely gave a speech to the people. Observers are questioning the real reason behind the postponement on social media about the health situation of a man who is barely emerging in the political sphere despite the chaos. Is the pandemic the real reason behind it? Equations and misfortunes in Morocco followed on social boil following a price hike and inflation. Only successive visits by Zionist officials, who left an insulting mark for Moroccans on their soil, and another prospective visit to the ministers of justice and regional cooperation. The throne celebration in Morocco, commemorating the day of the king's accession to the throne, is a national occasion celebrated on July 30th of each year. It is usually punctuated by several officials and popular celebrations.
The chairman of the U.S. Congressional Defense Committee, Senator James Inhofe, called for a review of organizing the annual U.S. military exercise in Morocco due to the kingdom's obstruction of efforts to resolve the issue of decolonization in Western Sahara. Inhofe, senator from Oklahoma, recalled in other statements that for decades, everyone has agreed on the need to organize a self-determination referendum in Western Sahara, including the International Court of Justice 1975, the United Nations, the European Court of Justice, and the African Union.
General Langley, as I mentioned in my office, I'm deeply concerned about the plight of the people of Western Sahara. For more than 5 decades, the Sahrawi people have been subjected to repeated broken promises and vicious attacks by the Moroccan government. Morocco has done nothing to repair the damage that they've done to the Sahrawi people after all these years, and they've done nothing to show they're serious about resolving the crisis. Instead, they've misled multiple American administrations on their willingness to negotiate, I'd say unwillingness to negotiate, a mutually agreeable outcome to that issue. And that's why I've spoken to Senator Rounds and other members of this committee on this issue, and why I have pushed DOD to look at the alternative locations for the annual African Lion military exercise that's been hosted in Morocco previously. And I'm pleased that Secretary Austin is in agreement with me on this issue, and so I'd ask each one of you to respond as to whether or not you are also in agreement.
To Sudan now, the Sovereign Council declared that the judgment was left to civilians and that the army was free to perform its functions under the Constitution. In a statement, the Deputy Chairman of the Council, Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, said that the military institution in Sudan would not uphold a bloodshed authority, warning of internal and external schemes threatening Sudan's unity and security. And for more international news, let's follow this report.
Residents of Rio de Janeiro slum held a vigil on Friday, protesting police violence after a raid left at least 18 dead on Thursday, holding candles and signs demanding peace. Residents of the Almao complex gathered to denounce the barbarity that grips their community.
Following their escape from gang violence in Cité Soleil's town, which resulted in 400 deaths and hundreds of houses being destroyed last month, hundreds of students are seeking refuge at a famous high school in Port-au-Prince. Children from newborns to teenagers are sleeping in classrooms that are acting as makeshift rooms on the huge campus, which is now empty as it coincides the summer break.
The federal prosecutors in Brazil on Friday charged 3 men for the murder of the British journalist Dom Phillips and the indigenous expert Bruno Pereira, a crime that drew widespread attention to the increasing lawlessness in the Amazon rainforest under the government of the President Jair Bolsonaro.
A more sustainable modern-era airship called Airlander is gearing up for full-scale production, with the first commercial flights planned for 2026. The Airlander is over 90 meters long and has a 10-ton maximum payload and can be in the air for 5 days, with a range of 4,000 nautical miles at a maximum altitude of 20,000 feet.
Well, that's all we have for now, but here is a reminder of our top stories. Ships filled with grain are set to leave Ukraine's Black Sea ports after the UN and Turkey brokered an export deal. Ukrainian officials accuse Russian forces of striking the Black Sea port of Odessa after an agreement to restart shipments of blockaded grain. Motorists queue at petrol stations in Sri Lanka as desperately needed fuel arrives in the country. Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and 10 of his ministers survived the no-confidence vote. And finally, as your final, Donald Trump's former advisor Steve Bannon is found guilty of contempt of Congress. Well, we reached the end of our program. This is Karim for Zachary signing off. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.